So now that we have done this much, we are actually able to load JSON data directly into our application, but it's quite static. It's just showing a single web page. And in order to change it, we need to add some properties first. So in order to create some UI components that the user would use in order to change that URL so that it shows different web pages as selected by the user. So see, I am trying to make the user change the page number as well as the subtype. So I just saw all the subtypes that were present inside that API site and just copying them exactly as their names were there written. So there were total of 8 of them actually. So I'm just going about writing all their names inside an array for now. And see how I have not used them as static type. You could either just create them as static var array as well, but I have not used them. It's because Swift was throwing an error while I was using this array to loop inside the picker. So for simplicity purpose, I'm not using that. You would understand in much more detail. So for now, you could see that it has a type manga as well. Manga is not a subtype, it's actually a type. But inside this manga type, it has its own subtype. So what we could do is that we can incorporate that manga thing inside our application as well. But it could be kind of a challenge as well. So I believe that if you were to give it some time, you can just make this happen. And as a third option, you can have manga inside your application. Here I'm just trying out why and how would I approach this thing. Obviously I would just create another array and I would add all the types which I saw inside of manga. But then I quickly dropped the idea because I think it's not going in the right direction. What I mean by that is that what we are writing here, thinking that it would show up inside manga, is actually a subtype only. So it should all be inside subtype array only. But I prefer to show that picker view in a semantic way. Thus having too many options would just clutter them all together and it would not look good to the user. So the UI experience matters. For that purpose, I'm not creating another picker as well, and I've left it for you to do. So just get more understanding of how the picker works, and you would understand how to use it more when you just completely watch this video. So now I'm creating an array for page number as well. You see, I could have gone to create a page picker view ranging from 1 to 100, but that doesn't make sense. A user won't just go on about changing pages again and again. So for a simplicity and usability purpose, I've just used 7 or 6 pages. So yes, user can go up to 6 pages, but that's about it. So now that we have done this much, we just need to create state properties now. And yes, adding 2 last properties to the subtype, which were common in both manga and anime, which was by popularity and by favorite. And also make sure the spellings are right. In my case, I have written the wrong spelling for favorite, so I just corrected that. And now that we have done with this much, we just need to create the state property now actually. So yes, we can just go about creating the state property now. So it's simple, you write state and then you write @state and then you write private var and you just name it, you create an integer. And the reason why I'm creating an integer is because it would store the selected value inside the picker view that we would have in our app, right? So actually the picker view works as an it would have selections, right? And each selection is marked by a numerical value, the position. So this state variable that we have created would actually use two-way binding to change its value to show inside of array. So we would we would use that changed value inside to change our URL string. It will make much more sense once I write more code. So I'm just creating a separate VStack for this purpose actually, since we cannot just write it inside the list. I felt like it would not it would just become really congested, so just make things more simpler to look in a more readable way. And since this is only requiring one single view, all the code is being written in a single file only, just except for the fact that we just created a whole new file for the image loading purpose. Otherwise it's all inside one file. So that's what we are doing here. So now I'm just quickly like creating the first text that would show up at the very top of the app, and I just gave it the name your animalist. It's totally up to you what name you want. So you could just get creative here and add different kind of modifiers to your text so it looks good. So now that we have done this much, we can just create the picker now. So the syntax of picker goes like this: you just write picker, then you write the parameter. So in our case I'm writing your selection. You could just write anything here, it doesn't really matter, because we are using segmented picker style and it won't show up the parameter inside of it. And now we are using two-way binding by writing $ beforehand subtype selection value, that state property that we just created. And this is all the reason, because when the user would actually be interacting with this picker and he changes the picker value from something else, this subtype selection would actually store that numerical positional value inside of it, and it would just send it back to Swift UI. So it updates the UI. That's why we are doing this. Now let's just create a simple loop. As I have told you earlier as well, you could have just used array.count for the final value of the loop, final value of the range. But since it's not a static array, it can throw some error. For simplicity purpose, I have left it like this and just created a normal loop ranging in between the numbers. And now, as I told you, we just have to always create a constant inside loop which would go through each and every value, and that's what we are doing here. So this loop goes over from 0 to 6 inside this array which is named subtype. So it would list out all the values inside subtype which we had just written here. So it's not actually 0 to 6, it's actually 0 to 8, my bad. And now we are actually giving it a modifier as well, which is picker style, segmented picker style. That's what it makes it like segmented style. Otherwise it would have shown up as a wheel style, and I think that don't really looks well. Now that we have done this much, we can just copy paste this thing again, since we only need to change like 2-3 properties more, like inside the array, and also the two-way binding is with the wrong state property. Here we would use page, and inside of the array we would use page number, and that's about it. Now the second picker would actually loop over the numbers that we had written inside this array, 0 1 1 2 3 4 5 6, which are the numbers which we would use inside our URL string as well, which would update the UI. So I hope you are able to like grasp the whole thing, like what's going on. And now that we have done this much, we just need to create 2 new state properties. I will tell you why I'm using 2 new state properties as well. And I guess they don't really need to be state properties, but for simplicity purpose I'm using, and obviously they need to be inside this only. Let's just fold this function for now to make things more clear. Like we don't really have a lot of stuff going on, but the function was like really covering a lot of area, so it can become a little bit confusing. So now I'm just creating that state property again. So these state properties would actually hold string values. So you name it really simple, like str. You can just name it str2. And I would tell you also like why did I not name it only str, because str1 is something else. Str1 is the initial part of our URL, which contains a main thing which is not changing with any home page, any web page actually. So now we just quickly created two new string types, and we would use these string types inside of our function. So let's just quickly define them. Since we have given them an empty value, and now we are changing them since they are variable as well. So now we would change them, and we would use string interpolation for this purpose. And inside of string interpolation, we would actually write the array value. So in our case, it would actually be page number with that page as its index. Since I told you that it has two-way binding, so whenever you change the position of the selection inside picker, this page would store that positional value. And now we are using this as the same thing as the index. So if it were at 0, it would show 1. If it were at 2, it would show the value 2 corresponding in the array. So that is why what we have done here. And similarly for our third string, the subtype, since you can see that page comes in the middle, so I have given it the value str2. Now we would use subtype, and subtype comes in the last, so I would give it the value str3. Quite simple, right? We don't really need to put a lot of brain into it to understand like what I have done. Using again string interpolation, we would actually use the subtype array, and inside of which we would use the subtype selection, which is a state property that we just created. So I hope now you understand why I created these state properties and why I use them inside picker. So just had to get their value inside of this function. So now that we have done this much, we can just freely modify our URL string as well, since we are going to change it as the user changes the UI component. So now we just need to create a third variable, and it won't be actually a variable, it would actually be a constant because it won't change. And I would name it str1 actually, and it would be till anime, since I decided that I would not change the type by the user input inside my application. That's a task I have given you to do. So it's quite simple. Now you just have to create a string which contains the initial static part, and now you know that we can just simply write additional operators between string. So that's what exactly we are going to do now. The later on part is being stored inside string 1, string 2 and string 3. So you can just simply add up addition sign in between them, and now it works perfectly fine. So I think in my knowledge it should work perfectly fine, and I would show you the result and I would tell you if it works or not.